Without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator tonight, Josh Becker. You can read his former bios here. He is the founder and general partner of New Cycle Capital. He is the co-founder for Clean Tech for Obama, and he was one of the advisors for stimulus package. Another thing he can advise you if you really need to is how to fly red eyes to DC. He knows the holy trinity of, he told me what they are, back pillow, neck pillow, and sleeping pills. So if... A sleeping mask, sorry. I thought it was sleeping pill. Oops. So if you need any advice on stimulus package or how to fly to red eyes, there's Josh. So please join me to welcome Josh.
If you have a good source of sleeping pills, I'm open to that as well. Well, excellent. Thank you for having me. You know, I spent 4 years here. I got a JD MBA before they eventually kicked me out of Stanford, and I couldn't spend more time here. So I spent a lot of time in this building, and it's nice to be back here today. This is fun. I mean, this is fun. This is an exciting time. You know, we've never had a program like this. We've never had a time like this, and I'd argue we've never had an administration like this that is so focused on, I think, on important priorities, what they see as really important growth priorities and important strategic priorities for our country. I think we'll see obviously a lot more over the next few years, but the stimulus package was an important piece of this, as you will see, and as you may know already, because it was seen as creating jobs, but also as really laying the foundation for a competitive U.S. economy going forward into the future. So one thing you will also see is that a lot of this is still being defined. So we will have details on some things. Other things, myself or the panelists, will not have details yet on. And so again, in the spirit of having it be defined, we actually went to them and asked for several $billion that we could give away tonight. So at the end, if you stay to the end, you can look under your chairs. If there's a yellow dot, you will win up to $1 billion. So that was very exciting that we were able to do that. Thank you. We were a well-connected group. I was asked to kind of survey the group, both for the panelists and just for the audience attendees, and see what kind of groups people fit into. So just to kind of raise your hands, students, entrepreneurs, great, investors, members of the media. Okay, good. I'm glad there's not enough. Good. And other, I guess I should say. Yeah. Other. Okay. All right, good. Absolutely. Absolutely. Good. Well, I'm going to give a bit of an overview, and obviously, this is, we could, spend entire day or entire week really on this package. So I'm going to give a really broad brush overview, and then our panelists will be able to delve into each of the areas more, and then obviously with your questions, we'll hopefully get to what you guys, personally are interested in. So, as we say, a stimulating start. It was a massive package, broad-based, as you know, and the political and economic context certainly shaped it, and I'll touch on some of those things going forward. And one of the constant tensions of this was kind of balancing shovel-ready versus transformational. As stimulus, the focus is on jobs, and so that led to the shovel-ready, but also a real interest on the part of the administration, people involved, to really see it as part of a transformational effort for the U.S. economy to make the U.S. economy more competitive. As always, a messy process on Capitol Hill, and we'll see. But I think overall, still a good, great achievement. And from the beginning, they told us sort of this down payment on major needs idea, which was that things like, for example, like the smart grid. Again, is it going to be immediate job creation? Does that talk? Is that in the category of shovel-ready? Maybe, maybe not. Also, are you going to accomplish the entire smart grid transformation that's needed with this package? Well, no. I mean, that itself would be, several trillions of dollars. But there's a notion of down payment. And important priorities like the grid, the notion was we could have a significant chunk of money in this case about 10, 11 billion dollars, that we could prove out some of the initial concepts. So really a down payment on then what needs to happen. And as Rahm Emanuel likes to say, we shouldn't let a crisis go to waste, and we're trying to take advantage of this crisis again to really set priorities well into the future. Where the money goes, some of it, a significant amount, obviously, was tax relief. Of the non-tax portions of this, it went infrastructure, healthcare, education as the top 3 priorities, as you would expect. And then I think energy was sort of the surprising 4th, or not surprising for those who care about it, but significantly it was 4th, and actually a close 4th if you really look at the numbers compared to the other areas. The purpose is, again, create jobs. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, this is about creating jobs. The events that they're doing to launch various parts of this all involve different opportunities where they can highlight job creation. And for those applying for this money, to the extent you can show that you're going to create jobs, then you have a much better chance. But some other priorities as well, including state and local government budgets that we knew that, everyone knew that those were hurting, and there was a notion here that we could help stabilize some of that situation, again, as well as invest into the future. And the thought was that would provide, obviously, long-term benefits and beyond just the short-term job creation, and help those most affected. No earmarks in this legislation, which is significant for any of those who know Washington. And I think many would say, mostly say that this is a good thing. As a result, however, it means a great amount of power in the agencies. So career people have a tremendous amount of say over a tremendous amount of money, in many cases much more money than they would, an order of magnitude than what they normally have in a given year or two as a result. Most existing formula, the emphasis from the beginning was, hey, let's not write new legislation. If you can take something that's already approved, for example, as you know, these things kind of generally go in cycles. If you get something passed, it's authorized, then it has to get appropriated. That usually takes several years. So if we could find things that are already authorized but just not appropriated yet, then that was considered a good way to go. And a real focus on transparency. We'll judge going forward how well that this administration is doing in this. But Recovery.gov was meant to be a very open and hopefully a groundbreaking effort at transparency in this area. One other theme is that this is often focused through local communities, so often through state and local sources. And what that means is, yes, if you're interested in this, you do need to spend time in D.C., but that a lot of this was given out to states, again, because of that, something that can be done quickly, as opposed to figuring it all out from D.C., then states and local governments then have a lot of influence over a great deal of this money. So let's get into some of the specifics. Energy is the area that I know best, and I have some good real-time information. I spoke a few hours ago to one of my colleagues who we started Clean Tech for Obama with, a guy who was at Vantage Point Venture Partners, who is now working in DOE, working on the stimulus. So basically, how it's working from an energy standpoint is a guy named Matt Rogers, who's also a Bay Area guy, who is a McKinsey partner, who has gone in as a senior advisor to Dr. Chu, overall responsible for really formulating the process around the energy stimulus. And then he's got 5 slots underneath him. I believe 4 of those have been filled, I think, at this time. So our friend Sanjay Wagley is one of those people who's working on the renewable energy portion of that. Also, a guy named Steve Spinner, who's also a Bay Area guy, who was raised a lot of money during the campaign and has been an entrepreneur in the Valley, is also working for Matt Rogers directly on some of the smaller grants. So the good news, I think, and the subtext, obviously, this evening is how does this all factor Silicon Valley? The good news is we're starting to see some good representation from the Valley. Obviously, Dr. Chu himself, being from the Bay Area, but and the sort of next level down, the implementation, particularly the stimulus, we're starting to see some people going in, and that's extremely positive, certainly in my mind. As you look through the programs, again, it's a massive amount of money. And get to put this in context, the budget for DOE as a whole. Who knows anybody know what the budget of DOE is generally? Guesses? Anyone? It's actually, the numbers were quite 80 billion, hundreds of billions. It's actually about 25 billion. Um, so probably smaller than some of you thought. And of that, what percent do you think goes to sort of energy versus things like nuclear weapons cleanup and things like that? What would anyone guess? Yeah, it's actually 2/3 of the DOE's budget in traditional years goes to nuclear weapons issues, nuclear weapons related issues, like about $5 billion a year for weapons cleanup and things like that. So really about $8 billion actually going towards energy at all, and about $2 billion of that generally filtered down into what was called EERE, which is the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. So when we're talking about 43 billion, and depending on how you count it over a couple of years, that's a tremendous increase. You know, again, figuring most of that's going to renewable energy, energy efficiency, that's a massive increase. Weatherization alone has gone up to $5 billion. Now, weatherization, that's a program that existed for a long time, so it's just ramping that up, but significantly, and that's, again, more focused on generally lower-income homes. But, you know, significant amount for energy efficiency across the board in a variety of areas. Then there are specific technologies that were winners, too. Batteries, for example, there's real effort to create a domestic battery industry, feeling like if we take a international oil addiction and replace it with an international battery addiction, that doesn't help us necessarily. So there's $2 billion in there for batteries, so that was one of the big winners. Again, some things you might expect, others you may not. $400 million for geothermal. So, got specifically carved out. And again, geothermal companies can apply for other parts of the stimulus too, but they had a specific carve-out of $400 million there. A bunch coming in for clean city through automotive in a couple of buckets, including a clean cities bucket that a number of Valley companies I know try to form consortiums, and I think that's an interesting development where you're seeing private companies working with local governments to try to create unified packages to apply for some of this money. This is, again, graphically, I don't know if it might be kind of hard to see anyway, but it kind of reflects the last slide. Here's an example around the grid. So again, $11 billion total for the grid, and this was left very vague, and a lot of us were sort of wondering, okay, well, how's this going to happen? Because about $4.5 billion was stated specifically for smart grid. The Office of Electricity at DOE, it traditionally has about an $80 million a year budget. And so you're talking about it being primarily now responsible for a $4.5 billion budget. And so now we're starting to see the second wave of this. So we're about a third of the way through, for energy, again, as an example, we're about a third of the way through a program that's being announced. So over the next 6 weeks, you should see probably the rest of the programs being announced. Once a program is announced, then there's generally a 30, 60-day kind of application deadline, and then generally awards are made and the money's spent, and the goal is to have it all spent by September of 2010, although from what I hear, really the more realistic goal is probably about 2/3 of it have been spent by that time. So again, that gives you a little sense of sort of the timeline. So here's an example. So we had kind of a broad strokes around smart grid, and then what we had is sort of just the other day, we had Vice President Biden make an announcement around this issue in Missouri with the Commerce Secretary, again emphasizing jobs, about outlining plans to distribute more than $3.3 billion in smart grid technology development grants and an additional $615 million for smart grid storage, monitoring, and technology viability. And it outlines that they will provide grants ranging from $500,000 to $20 million for smart grid technology, also grants of $100,000 to $5 million for the deployment of grid monitoring devices. The program provides matching grants up to 50% for investments planned by electric utilities and other entities. It then goes on to say who are eligible applicants, et cetera, et cetera. There's also a 20-day comment period there. So again, that's just an example of how we went from the big picture to then something specifically being announced. Then there's a comment period, people that can then apply, and we'll make the grants and hopefully make some good decisions. Just to mention, there's a large piece of the energy which was also on the tax issue, so we extended things like the PTC for wind. That's cost, but people view that obviously as important going forward. And this other part, which is a little hard to read here, but increase in the loan guarantee program, and basically, and also an attempt, what was labeled here as sort of the bonds, really an attempt to help clear up the tax equity market, right? As many of you know, in Purdue, all the renewable energy projects are the focus. They're all funded by tax equity partners. Many of those are banks who then subsequently had no profits and didn't need to offset taxes, and they weren't interested in partnerships, or they didn't exist anymore. And therefore, there's a ground to halt a lot of the projects, and therefore this was an effort to help shore that up by saying, okay, great, you can actually do grants. People can actually just get money for sort of supporting these projects as opposed to getting tax incentives. Moving on to education, this is a massive one-time investment, a massive program. And here again, to drill down a little bit into the Bay Area focus, let me come back to that in a moment. This talks a little bit about what's really been outlined. So for the $53 billion, it's really been outlined. The idea is 80% for public elementary, secondary, and institutions of higher education, and then as you see another 18% for some other areas around monetization and public safety. Here again, with the Bay Area, we have some good representation, which I also think will show a little bit about some of the expanded focus or the expansive focus of this, which is that a woman named Martha Cantor, who's been chancellor of the Foothill De Anza Community College, was named the undersecretary in education. So that's a big deal. About 35,000 students go through that program, which is as large as University of Michigan. So there's a real sense that by giving her such a platform, the sense that they're really going to look at community colleges, look at alternative ways that people get trained and out into the workforce. But again, it's also nice to have Bay Area representation there. Going back up to this other slide, this is very interesting, and these details are coming out. But again, if you follow this, and a lot of this is available at leadingonrecovery.gov, you'll see that Arne Duncan announced on April 20th, $1.4 billion funds now available for Illinois, and they announced $4 billion now available for California on April 17th. And again, if you look at the sort of Illinois announcement, it says that they got these funds. In order to qualify for the funds, they provided assurance that they will collect, publish, analyze, and act on basic information regarding quality of classroom teachers, annual student improvements, college readiness, effectiveness of state standards, interventions in turning around underperforming schools. So again, these are the 4 areas that the administration has laid out that they think are priorities. And so they're asking states to warrant, when they get this money, that they're going to work on these 4 areas. And there's a piece, as you see on the other slide, that's more competitive, which essentially the idea is that states will be rewarded. States who then, with their initial group of money, actually follow through on these 4 priorities here, will then be will get a greater amount of the follow-on money. So again, so that a big focus on accountability and transparency here as well. In healthcare, I'm certainly not an expert in this area, and we have someone on the panel who knows a lot more about this than I do. So I'm going to defer a little bit around this to the panel. But obviously, a large sum of money here, and there are some opportunities for Valley companies in that area, as we will discuss. Here's just a general list of some programs with which funding has already been announced in certain areas. Transportation, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I don't think many of you here are creating new infrastructure companies in terms of building roads and such. If you are, good luck. But a lot, a substantial, obviously a lot of amount of money set aside in those areas. And again, hopefully those are more shovel-ready projects, as we know. And here's just another something else I thought was interesting on housing and community development. Again, gives you a little bit of a drill down, but probably not as relevant for some of the entrepreneurs in this audience. There are a lot of sources of information online, and that's a good thing. Hopefully we can hold the administration to the focus on transparency. You also get some more expertise here from folks, and I'll talk about some other sources at the end. So that ends our overview, but hopefully that gives you a sense of where this money is going and what the focuses are, and a little bit of a sense of how the Bay Area is playing a role and how you can be involved. So I'm not going to take any questions on that anymore. So right now. because I don't want you to ask. No, I'm just kidding. No, we're going to save the questions for later. But at this point, we have one other panelist who has a presentation who's going to delve a little more deeply, especially into the energy efficiency side of things. That's Donnie Foster, also known as DK. He's an energy efficiency expert and entrepreneur. He's founded a company called Power Assure in the past, which won the California, the Clean Tech Open, the Smart Power and Overall Sustainability Awards. He's active in that organization. He's starting a new company, really consultancy around energy efficiency for those of you interested in that space. He's been working hard also in D.C., so he can share some war stories. And he was also a general manager of HP's software services business, I believe. So a longtime exec in the Valley, and please welcome Donnie Foster.
Thanks, Josh. Yay. Well, good evening, all. What I'm going to do is talk a bit about the opportunities, what I call stimulating the entrepreneurial spirit. And as it relates to that, I'll start with a story. I started Power Assure about 2 years ago. It's a piece of software that goes into data centers and makes them terribly efficient. Data centers run at about 80% waste, and so we can save about half of that energy. It's a significant power savings. The interesting thing is the adoption of that is damn hard. So as an entrepreneur trying to sell software, one of the things that happened almost coincident with the founding of our company was an EPA report that was stimulated by a law called 109-431. So it was an EPA study that said, let's look at data center efficiencies and see what we can do to improve that. That bill had a lot of very interesting results for me personally. It got me involved in politics. It got me involved on the Hill. It got me involved because the general outcome of the bill and the subsequent study by the EPA was to say, basically, we have to improve hardware and we have to improve cooling. It didn't talk about software. It didn't talk about virtualization. It didn't talk about all the things that this valley's about, frankly, except IBM and Dell and HP who produce that. And I used to work at HP, nothing against it, but that wasn't what I was looking for. So it caused me to start looking at a way to influence that and got me involved in some legislation and so on. So what I find is that as an entrepreneur, you have to take a whole different approach to this. And so I'll be spending that time tonight. Just another sidebar, although Power Assure is going strong, one of the things that I saw with the stimulus bill is a heck of a lot of interest in trying to understand how to capture that. And just the work that I had done on the Hill, the work I had done with legislators, the work I had done with the different departments, gave me a whole bunch of information that I was piling over here. What am I going to do with this information? And I'm an entrepreneur. I got to monetize that. So therefore, the consulting thing that we'll talk about a little bit later, I'll give a pitch for that as we go forward. Let's look at the stimulus in action. Now, what this is from the bill, the stimulus bill. If you take a look, almost every paragraph has or precedes or has this information in it. And it's consistent with what Josh said earlier. Job preservation and creation, infrastructure investment, energy efficiency and science, assistance to the unemployed, and state and local fiscal stabilization. All to be done for the fiscal year ending 2009, some say 2010, it depends. But if, as an entrepreneur, this is a great business plan. This is a great business plan. If you don't have this in your pitches, if you don't have this in terms of your grants, if you don't have this in terms of your information to folks who are going to help fund you, you're making a mistake. And I'm very opinionated. And I think this is the kind of thing that you can pull out of these documents if you take a look. Josh did an amazing job of giving a whole view of what's going on here. I'm not that smart. I can't get there. It's just way too much for me. So what I did is I focused on looking at the bill. I actually read the stimulus bill. Great weekend reading for some of you. That's 781 pages or something like that. So as I went through there, I got the pad, and I said, energy efficiency, and specifically for PowerAssure, my software, what can I do with that? So I scanned and I found energy efficiency, $3 billion from the Department of Defense, some from the Department of Energy, science, ARPA, innovation loans, and other places. So I was able to pull out of that $23 billion just in that one section that I can use for PowerAssure, just for my company. Sounds like a good VC investment, doesn't it? So, suggestion for you as entrepreneurs, take some time, and we'll go through this in the next couple of minutes. Take some time and take a look at this information. There's a new tax and cap plan. There's new legislation coming out now on tax and cap. You heard about this? Some people say, the American Clean Energy and Security Act of 2009. They're currently working on this. It has things like renewable energy, carbon capture and sequestration, clean energy fuels, smart grid, on and on and on. So lots of opportunities as we go forward. The ban. This is a ban for some of us old guys, but the three days grace say it's not too late, it's never too late, right? There's a real opportunity now because although all of this has been allocated as stimulus, if you take a look at what's really going on and what's available, poquito, just small amounts that are starting to dribble out. Josh mentioned that some of these agencies have never had so much money. They've never had earmarks, or with earmarks, they've had directives of how to spend it. Now they don't have that. So many of these departments are looking for ways to get this money out. They've got a goal to move it quickly, but they don't know how to do it. So in fact, I'm seeing that as a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, spending time on the Hill, helping people look at that, working with folks who are actually very good at doing this. You have to watch out and not deal directly with lobbyists. There's some new laws, some new directives, so I don't quite understand it. During the panel discussion, let's ask Josh. I don't quite get it. But there are some comments about lobbyists that you got to watch out for. But generally, if you call your legislators, if you call the departments and start to make some information available to them, I think there's some real opportunities. This is my summary of the opportunity. You're matching the businesses, and I'm going to just let you read it, but you're matching businesses with corporate governance, and there's some real magic that can occur there. So I'll spend a second and then talk about this. Is this what you guys are looking for, by the way? Are you looking for some opportunities, I think? A lot of, okay, good. Someone's here. Money for the little, it's interesting. I think that getting money for the little guys, a comment, is darn hard to do, but not impossible. You got to get a little bit clever about it. And following the normal our normal approach is we got a good idea. We go pitch that to VCs. VCs help us get going maybe, or the angels will help us get some seed funding. I think all of that's blown out the door with this. Quite frankly, I think it's a whole new world. We really need to think about the ways that we can use VCs. If there's some investors in here in VCs, God bless you. I'm working right with you, but at the same point, I'm looking at alternatives. So I think there's some real opportunities that we can work with this. Last night at one of the meetings I was at, I think I talked to 2 or 3 entrepreneurs, fully funded by VCs, fully going forward. They're approaching this as being one more investment round for them. So rather than going to the next round of investment with VCs, they're saying, there's some potential here. We can talk more about that later, but isn't that interesting? I think it changes the whole way you do things. And in the clean tech field, if you're dealing with customers in terms of not only their improving their profitability, so either cost or profit, but also looking at people and planet. So really focusing on the full clean tech view. I think there's some real opportunities that can be expanded. That's what this is about. At the bottom line, there's climate change, there's stimulus because of the economy, so there's regulation. Policy is kind of coinciding with entrepreneurship. What a wonderful time. Although this is a tough time in the world, for entrepreneurs, I am just excited pink because of this. There are so many opportunities. So you just got to do it. And what does that mean? Josh talked about recovery.com. How many of you guys have been on recovery.com? .gov, sorry. .gov. I would change that, but it should be .gov. Boy, I screwed up. There is also not just the U.S. government, but if you say California, go to recovery in California, recovery in Colorado. Most of the states have their own recovery site. So go to the Gov site in each of those states. You'll get some information. And thanks for that correction, .gov. How many of you are registered on ccr.gov or FBO? Do you know this stuff? A few of you. If you want to find what's going on, again, I'm being very specific here and giving you information. You need an employer identification number or an SSN. You need DUNS number. You need to find out what NAICS codes are, what federal supplier codes are, what PCS codes are, cages. You've got to get your own identifier. Your PIN number is now called an MPIN. So all of that is a process you go through. It takes 2 weeks. If you're interested in finding grants, in finding stimulus money, in hooking up with the right partners, this is a good place to start. Networking. I already talked about a couple of these. We're going to have one of the members is from Eric is from the labs. So talk to him about how to link with the labs. I've already been working in my own business with Lawrence Berkeley Labs, excuse me, on energy efficiency activities. They've hooked me up. They basically said, we don't get any of this stimulus money. Well, they do. And we can't really do anything. They have so many contacts. This is all about networking. If you are an entrepreneur, focus on networking. Focus with the labs. Focus with the legislators. I've had discussions with Anna Eshoo. I've had discussions with other representatives as well as senators throughout the land. One of the interesting things is they're all interested in this. They're all trying to get ideas. It's pretty much a vacuum, if I can call it that. There's a vacuum of information. These people are trying to figure out how to spend money in the departments. The legislators are trying to figure out how they make their next election work. So they're trying to figure out what they can really work into legislation that makes sense. And they need help. I mean, Anna has been wonderful. I spent time with her this last weekend. She did a clean tech open house for her facility downtown Palo Alto. She had cleaned and greened it. Her landlord did it. She gets the credit. But her landlord actually cleaned that place up, made it terribly energy efficient, and she is the first legislator in the country who has a green certified building. That's kind of cool. The companies who did that, and take a look at her website, I'll just push you there, are going to make a lot of money because they already have that advert. Guess what's happening? That's already starting to move out. As an entrepreneur, doing a little bit of that is a clever way to get going. I don't have departments here. The Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, Department of Education, all of those have monies for different activities. The thing that I would focus you on is demonstration projects and innovation projects. You will find a lot of words throughout that 780 pages about either demonstration or innovation. You can't do it by yourself. The other piece of the networking that I have here is leaders and mentors. You need to find leaders and mentors. If you're a starting entrepreneur or a well-established company who's trying to get into this, you need to hook up with bigger guys. It's interesting. It's almost counterintuitive, but I'm working right now with some of the biggest electric utilities, some of the biggest the biggest companies, energy companies, oil and gas companies, who are trying to say, how do I redo this? What do I do? And they're interested in a little guy. I'm a little entrepreneur. Because they're trying to get those ideas, they're trying to recast themselves because they need to. Finally, you need to pursue this with tenacity, and I'll talk more about that. The pursuit looks like loans, grants, and solicitations. If you go to those websites I talked about, you will start to get hooked into grant applications, to guaranteed loans that are available if you're ready for production, commercialization, and solicitations. And those solicitations are for demos. The solicitations are for commercial products, and they are at all levels. So you have to be not focused at DC only. You've got to go to the state. And I'm talking to downtown San Jose about some stuff right now. They all have money. And as Josh, if you saw the way that chart showed before, it's moving all this tax relief into the various areas. But you got to talk to people. If you sit in your office, you're not going to get it. You got to be out there trying to understand and trying to collaborate and contribute to the public good. One of the comments I'll make for you is that as we've gone through this at PowerAssure, I never talked about my company. I never talked about my specific technology except in a general form and how that helps public good. That's the change in process that I've had to go through. The learning I got is that I can't talk to a legislator and ask them to help legislate the use of my company unless I talk in generic terms. If I talk in generic terms, maybe that's possible. I also have a comment about direct and indirect here. You can go directly, but there's also, if you sign up as a small business, for example, and you sign up for a solicitation, they will tell you other companies who are also signed up. They will also tell you the big companies that you can work with. So again, if you get into FBO.org, I think it is, or Gov, I'm sorry, I don't remember, but the FBO site, you will see this stuff as you go forward. Now, more reading. One of the things that I discovered, and I'm going to close in just a minute here, so forgive me, because I'm not going to read all this stuff. Josh actually did that well. This is the Department of Defense's expenditure plans. 195-page report. It came out, it says March 20th. There's a lot of reading to do. There's a lot of research. As an entrepreneur, you may not be able to do this, so you have to get focused. You need to link up with folks. We'll talk later with, I'm sorry, Chris is on the panel. He's actually providing this kind of service. So for entrepreneurs, if you're looking for help, you can get help from others. But you need to get focused. And again, this information, you see 3.8 for infrastructure. In that 3.8 billion, just the top line, I took a deep dive in that, and there's work for me in PowerAssure. There's also work for all of you in many of these areas. Department of Defense, if I dig into this, and I'll leave energy efficiency alone, fuel optimization for mobility, facility engineering initiatives, operational efficiencies for commercial practices, domestic energy supply and distribution, smart grid kind of stuff, and tactical power systems and generators. So that's what the Department of Defense is looking for right now as what they call their small business innovation research, grants, money to get work done. So you should be looking at that as an entrepreneur as potential revenue. And that final line is pretty important. Cooley does some grant writing, so you can find some people who can do that. But more importantly, maybe you write grants. It's a lot of work, and it may not make sense. But if you're first starting out, I know a lot of entrepreneurs that I've worked with who have gotten grants by doing this themselves. So all options. On the commercial side, I hope you saw that green arrow go down. I did a quick search on FBO.gov. It's there. And FBO.gov had 274 potential opportunities in the last 7 days. I think I did this 2 days ago, so gosh knows what it is right now. As you dig into those, and there's lots of stuff for all of you, and I'm not going to tell you what that is, but my consulting firm will. I also want to do a plug. I won the Cleantech Open last year for Smart Power and also for sustainability. The Cleantech Open provides a lot of support for entrepreneurs. They are having sign-ups in a new business plan competition by May 30th. They're also looking for mentors. They're looking for help and volunteers to make this run. The amazing thing about the Cleantech Open is that it helps entrepreneurs kind of get their stuff together. I went in with a fairly sophisticated business plan, and they've helped me a great deal. Not only got awards, but through the awards, it's helped us get funding that I am very pleased about. They also have a SOAR program, the Stimulus Opportunities and Resources. They have documented all the stuff I talked about now in detail. If you sign up, you get it. If you don't sign up, you got to pay me. Difference is probably $200, $300 an hour for me, or a $150 entry fee for them, maybe. It's 200 right now. Sorry. So cleantechopen.com, go and look at this. I'm advertising it because I think it's really a good deal. I found some amazing mentors. I found some amazing linkages that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. I'm done. Here's some. I didn't bring any cards. Actually, I planned to, and I changed coats because it was too darn cold. I mean hot, sorry. So there's, write it down now. This is your only opportunity to get a business card from me tonight. And we'll leave questions. If you have questions, I see a lot of you doing this. Fill out the yellow cards, push them that way, and I think we're ready for the next step. Right, Josh? I'll turn it back to you.
I see someone sneaking out the side. She's not going to get any of the billions of dollars of grants available for those who stay to the end of the program. So if you leave, you forfeit your opportunity. I'm going to introduce the rest of the panel, and we'll have a chance to hear from them, and then we'll take your questions. So again, yellow cards, questions, write them down. That's your only opportunity to grill us here today. I'm going to start out with Eric. Eric has a very important role in commercialization at one of our national labs. I think always here in the Valley, when we think about, great, how do we get things done? And ultimately in the energy space, particularly, right, it's okay, time is urgent. How do we get things into the marketplace? So Eric has a very important role at Lawrence Livermore National Labs in charge of what's called industrial partnerships, focusing on the intellectual property and contractual issues associated with the licensing of and collaborations. He also won an award for excellence in technology commercialization in 2005. So I've been working a lot on this issue with the lab, so I know how important it is. So we're very lucky to have Eric here today. Chris we'll hear from as well as Vice President of Public Policy at Critical Connections. And as a stealth startup, so you can ask him in the right on yellow cards. What are you doing? As you saw, focused on
see me after.
Yes, various dimensions of innovation, and he's got a great background in engineering economics and has worked on a variety of issues, and has an undergrad from Stanford and a law degree from UC Berkeley. So that's crossing over there. It's interesting. Interesting.
Schizophrenic.
And David Katz, who we'll turn to first, has a great background addressing healthcare, which is another very important issue covered here in the stimulus. And prior to his current job, where he's director at the Center of Technology Integration at El Camino Hospital, he was the executive director of joint venture Silicon Valley's Smart Health Initiative. Just a lot of expertise in this issue. So why don't we start out, David? I'll turn to you. Can you tell us a little bit, from your perspective, what you've been focusing on the healthcare dimensions of the stimulus, and is it directed primarily at healthcare providers, or is it really an opportunity for entrepreneurs?
Well, almost all the money in the stimulus is directed at healthcare providers. I think the Obama administration has identified the flow of patient information as the most disruptive technology through the integration of patient records, the electronic patient records. And so most of the money is going directly to healthcare providers, hospitals and physicians, in the form of direct payments to develop electronic medical records. And the basic notion is that once you get electronic information into the healthcare domain, then suddenly you can develop a market. However, there is a great little pot of money that if you are very nimble, you might be able to tap in, and there is about $200 million set aside for NIH challenge grants. And this is, you can find it by going to grants.gov. And the basic notion is there will be about 200 grants of about $500,000 to $1 million each for organizations or groups that are developing innovative ways to treat disease or to improve health. And just an example, we have been supporting a group of students who have been working on a grant that has a very innovative way to deal with diabetes, and it involves the iPhone, social networking, and remote monitoring devices in a very unique reward system. So that was the good news. The bad news is the grants are due on April 27th. The funds are, however,
Still time.
there is still time if you're nimble, because I mean you have to do the things that DK mentioned. You have to
Don't
meet,
sleep.
to cross some hurdles, but it can be done.
Partner.
And go for it. Be nimble.
So, what was your view? What's kind of the purpose of the healthcare stimulus funding, and how will it create opportunities in sort of healthcare delivery for entrepreneurs essentially to impact healthcare delivery?
Yeah, healthcare is a little bit like 1985 Soviet Union. The information flow just doesn't work. But as in the Soviet Union, I think once that information starts to flow, there's tremendous opportunity. You can imagine that if all of your records from all sources, from your doctor, from pharmacies, from labs, from radiology departments, including your own personal information, your insurance records, are all available to anywhere, anytime, to anybody who is authorized to see them, that suddenly you can begin to aggregate that data and begin to have transparency of price and quality, and then you can have the same kind of transformations that potentially can take place in healthcare that took place when e-commerce revolutionized everything but healthcare.
Any other advice that you'd have for folks who are interested in kind of working in this space and potentially qualifying?
Healthcare organizations tend to be monolithic, but as these changes are introduced, there will be a tremendous amount of services that are going to be required. Physicians' offices are not, they find implementing electronic records very difficult, so there are managed services, there are workflow, there are opportunities to help with the workflow, and there are going to be interpreters who are going to be required. Once this price and quality data becomes available, you're not necessarily going to know how to understand it. So brokers of information, all kinds of electronic e-commerce services are out there, and I think this is a market that is going to be transformed somehow. It's almost impossible to say how that's going to happen, but when it happens, there will be tremendous opportunity for entrepreneurs to provide software and services.
So, David, if there are technology innovators around records and so on, they can get involved with the main providers. Is that how would an entrepreneur
that's
do that?
almost impossible to do. I think the providers are almost impossible to get into. I think the change is going to occur, and it's going to occur primarily because of the stimulus, because anybody who doesn't have electronic records and who isn't connected to health information exchange by 2015 is not going to be able to get Medicare or Medicaid funding, and that's about 46% of the total market. So there's probably some waiting and preparing that needs to take place, but once the dam breaks, once this information is aggregated, I mean, you think about the opportunities that exist in public health. If you suddenly know if there's an outbreak of a pandemic, you'll be able to identify exactly where that's taking place. So, I urge you to go talk to people, understand what changes could take place, and then be prepared for the onslaught when it takes place.
Cool.
Excellent. Eric, we can turn to you, and maybe talk a little bit about some of the context of the stimulus, but how do entrepreneurs and investors work with a lab like yours?
Bring stimulus funding. The fact of the matter is, I think that, and I think Chris will tell you this, that entrepreneurs are perhaps in a massive paradigm shift. All of a sudden, they have access to money that they used to have to go begging for, and oh, by the way, it's non-dilutive. One of the things, so it's transformational, and it truly is. And one of the things the labs can do, and not all labs are the same or equal. My lab, for instance, got almost no money from the stimulus, but we're looking for some. And so what we have to offer are some, I think, incredibly interesting technologies. I've only been there for a year and a half. I came as part of the transition when Lawrence Livermore Lab moved from what was essentially a University of California institution to now an LLC, so it's a private institution. The government still owns the facilities, but the contractor is a for-profit. And I've been at other labs, and I've had experience as an entrepreneur. I have never seen the kind of technologies this place has. It's just awesome. So if you are an entrepreneur, or if you're, better yet, if you're an interested individual, someone interested in becoming an entrepreneur, we have all kinds of stuff that you can use to start a company around. And we're trying to make that just as easy as we possibly can. Nobody leaves without a technology. Or cheap.
Those are the blue stickers under your chair.
Yeah.
And kind of beyond the stimulus program, I mean, how should folks think about, I mean, obviously there's a number of national labs, and how should folks think about choosing or trying to approach one, or how would they work with, your lab, Lawrence Livermore versus others?
That's an interesting question, and it's actually not one that I gave you, so I'll have to think about it. He promised not to do that. Anyway, the fact of the matter is, and this is very interesting. The Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory is what has been called in the past a weapons lab. We aren't so much anymore, but we've been referred to as that. And so one would think, well, if you want a bomb, that would be a good place to go. But that's not.
Raise your hand.
Yeah, anybody looking. We have some we have stuff that you wouldn't believe, and so my advice is, look at all the labs. They all have websites, and they all talk about their available technologies, and you can go out there and take a look. But we're working on a new synthetic way of creating antiviruses and vaccines. We have my favorite technology, which is sort of ultra-wideband, and it arose from what you might imagine a three-letter agency might want. But what it does is, what it's currently doing is it will be put on as many as we can of the metal containers that float around the world on ships. And if there's an intrusion this big or bigger, it will know it. And if the container is at the bottom of the cargo ship, 4 layers down, it will still send a signal out and say, I've just been intruded. I'm here. And so keep track of the time of the day. It's amazing stuff. So the short answer to the question is, all the laboratories have a wide variety of things, a lot of things that you wouldn't imagine that they have. But as a general rule, if you're looking for an energy technology, the National Renewable Energy Lab is a good place to start.
It's a lot further.
It's a lot further. Yeah, we're much closer. We've got this flywheel. So I'll tell you about it.
So, good. Well, I'll turn to Chris. And Chris, what are your perspectives as someone kind of out there, it sounds like kind of working with startups that might be interested in these areas. What is your experiences thus far, and what's sort of your advice for folks?
Well, thank you for the question. The stimulus bill is transformational, clearly. And this is transformational both in terms of our economy and in terms of the relationships in Silicon Valley. Transformational in terms of the economy because we're considering the stimulus being the funding source for the largest IT project in the history of the world. Smart grid really only is descriptive of part of what's happening here. The scale of this will dwarf the internet. So we have an opportunity here in Silicon Valley to take advantage of it. But it's transformational in the sense that there are new priorities, there are new relationships that are going to be formed, new partnerships, and new types of innovation. It's not just about technical improvements of tinkering with percentage changes of efficiencies and products, but really about transformational change along economic, social, and political boundaries. And it's there where we feel the greatest change is going to take place. This is a tremendous opportunity for small companies. Let me give you just one example. The smart grid funding that you were describing, we were very encouraged when the announcement came out as to the size of the grants. They're in the order of $500,000 to $20 million for smart grid. So if you do the math on that, you're looking at somewhere between 168 and 6,750 grants just in a smart grid program. So this really is one of the best opportunities we've ever seen for small companies, new entrants. In fact, I'd argue that even startups have an advantage in this game of the stimulus. So that's the real message we want to give to the entrepreneurs here in the audience.
Excellent. Good. And are there, so within the general framework, are you focused on certain issue areas yourself? You said.
Yeah, we're very interested in clean tech and alternative energy in particular because of this transformational change around having an IT project that really hits the sweet spot of Silicon Valley. Obviously, this will relate back into health records and everything. Software is going to be a key element of this, and it's introducing new software architectures to the energy system, the healthcare system, and that's really the sweet spot for us. So we feel that if we combine technical muscle with political change, economic, social dimensions of innovation, that we can induce transformational change using stimulus. And stimulus is also a new funding source. It implies new relationships with the labs, new relationships with other funding sources. Everybody's going to have to partner. The partnership opportunities are going to be extraordinary. Then it presents challenges for companies, obviously, because there's going to be a need to take advantage of this, but not everybody's a grant writer. Not everybody should be hiring lobbyists. That's the message we want to get into. How do you do this? What is the efficient way? Where's the return on your investment of your time, your energy for the reward? Remember, this is not just about winning the grant. You must apply. The strategy for companies in the Valley must be to put on multiple grant applications, to always have a grant application pending. The new requirement of startups will be that you have a government grant pending. It's the new patent pending, if you will. If you don't have it, the question is, what are you doing? But think about it. What is the benefit? The benefit to the company may not be in winning the grant. It may be just in the source of information that you have about the market and about what the priorities are in the economy. So there are essential reasons for you to be in this game. The challenge for small companies is to set it up correctly. And it's requiring new relationships. It doesn't mean that you all have to go out and hire a government affairs person or put one on staff. That's where we're seeing the opportunity to partner with people to enable access to the stimulus money. You can't simply take the business plan that you have on your desk and electronically submit it to these sites. That isn't a winning model for success, and that's where we see the opportunity.
Good. Well, I'm going to turn to some of the audience cards, and I don't know if we're still collecting. I guess they're still coming in, so you still have time. So first question I'll gear towards Chris and Donnie, and that is, what are the new business models for journalism and entrepreneurship? Wait, sorry, that's next month. Next month. Okay. A little foreshadowing.
Easy for me.
Next month's Venture Lab. What is this kind of first two questions are kind of similar. So, what is the process for entrepreneurs and small businesses to get some funding for the stimulus package? This question is for areas like implementing new ideas for increasing economic efficiencies or healthcare efficiencies. The other one says, I'm a startup, software online entrepreneur. How does the stimulus bill help me in terms of funding and starting a company in these tough economic times? And what grants, investments, funds can I tap into? So obviously people are interested in trying to drill down and, how does it, what's really the process and how can they get involved? Do you guys want to comment on that?
Yeah, if I may. There's this new concept. You've heard of B2C? You familiar with that? B2C? B2B? Heard of B2B? How about B2G? Think about that. So I want to quote the comment or coin that phrase, B2G. There's a lot of B2G opportunities, business to government, but it's a different way to look at it. You really have to think of this as being the same kind of paradigm shift, the transformational shift, as Chris said, in terms of the way you interact. So I will tell you that I read the stimulus package cover to cover. I thought of about, I'll say 1,000. I'm probably underestimating. There were so many opportunities in there. Every page there was if I'm a clean tech guy, if I'm a biomass guy, if I'm a energy efficiency guy, just reading the paper, say, oh my gosh, what opportunities. So I'm going to turn it back to you. I don't know who the questioner was, is if you can't figure it out, go get a job. I mean, there are so many opportunities out there. In this environment, though, I'll say it's tough, and so you have to think about it a little bit differently, and that's what Chris was mentioning.
And I'll just pick up on something that Josh said, too. You have a whole new set of career bureau agency officials who have been empowered. And you combine that with the accountability and transparency rules, I think it's fair to say that a lot of the assumptions that have been made about how you go about grants are going to need to be re-examined because of the new criteria and the new decision makers. It's not simply going to be about political relationships. And I do hope we touch on the role of lobbyists in here, because it's important that you understand what lobbyists can and cannot do in this area.
What can they and can they not do? I don't know.
They cannot make oral communications with the decision makers. In essence, as of 1 month ago, you have basically removed lobbyists for all practical purposes from the decision-making process. And what's more, I mean, I think there are going to be interesting issues about confidentiality going forward, right? Because, in essence, you better be prepared to have your business plan, your business proposal withstand scrutiny in a new light. The accountability rules are all going to be sorted out here. I think this suggests that before you initiate those communications, you really have a clear idea of what your objective is, what your working business model is, what you're going to do to contribute to the transformational change, so that you set up the game correctly and have a story and can be in a position to meet the decision makers that are a whole new set of decision makers here, and they're going to be applying different criteria.
Among the criteria, by the way, anyone yawning in the audience is not eligible for stimulus money. So we're keeping track of that. David, there's two questions. What work is going to ensure that standards will be applied to electronic medical records? Another one about standards for information exchange.
Well, actually, part of the legislation is that the federal government is required to set those standards at some undetermined point in the future. So that's a piece of the legislation. A considerable amount of money, however, is being given directly to the states through Medicaid for statewide health information exchange. So there will be a certain amount of leeway that occurs there. States are empowered to identify their own organization. Could be a government agency, could be some kind of a collaborative to serve as a statewide health information exchange, and then all providers, as part of the requirement to get these funds, have to be able to connect their information to that statewide exchange.
Have those standards been written yet, or are they still?
No, that's going to take place.
This is a huge phenomena here, is that ultimately the decisions are going to have to be based on standards, but if the standards don't exist, how can you make stimulus decisions based on non-existent standards? You have real issues around early adoption, and a lot of these early products may not last very long because they're going to be replaced with new standards. So this is kind of things that we're thinking about, is how to address the open issues before you go in and apply for stimulus money.
And the health care money doesn't flow until 2011, so presumably standards will have been developed in the meantime.
Good. There's a number of questions here. Obviously, you can see a Silicon Valley mindset trying to grasp, sort of this notion of working with government. There's one: is stimulus money a grant or a loan/investment? Another one is, with angels and VCs, the company gives a piece of itself. What's the price of getting funds by the government path? And are startups awarded a grant through stimulus, or how does this investment affect evaluation? Suffice to say, there's the simple answer. In most cases, these will be grants, and will not affect valuation. They're grants that you get, and if you use the grant wisely to affect the valuation of your company, then the valuation will go up. No, that's not true in all cases. There are, again, loan guarantees, and so they're part of the stimulus money is set aside for loan guarantees to help make it easier for folks to go out and get financing for, say, big projects. And there's also new things that will be decided, like ARPA-E, which we haven't talked about. That's scheduled to be about a $400 million DARPA for energy research, and it may happen that new organization, that ARPA-E may be able to use different funding mechanisms than may be entitled to have a broader range of sort of funding mechanisms than potentially the traditional method. So just kind of throwing that out there. But in most cases, these are grants, and you take them and do what you want with them. Any other comments on that?
Yeah, if I can, if you take a look there, you can match a grant with a guaranteed loan to get the grant moving. So once I've done the grant to do some initial research and I want to commercialize it, I can help commercialize it with a stimulus loan. And there's a lot of commercial activities, solicitations, what I called them during my presentation. Solicitations coming in that said, we have this desire to either do a demonstration or we have a desire to do a commercial, energy efficient thing or something like that, solar weatherization, that sort of thing. And we will consider some innovations in that as long as we understand with transparency that you're going to share them with the industry. So there is some IP issues that we really have not worked out yet. And I want you to all be aware of that. And I think that's the comment that Chris was making earlier. It's not obvious how all this works. And in the B2G environment, you've got to really think differently. Think about what that looks like and what your protections are. Because truthfully, there's some public good that needs to come out of this. And as you're looking at public good, that's the payment as opposed to dilution. That's the payment you got to make.
I just want to add there that you will enhance the value of your company just by having one or more applications in, whether you ever get them or not. That is the premise of what we're talking about here, is that for the enormous benefits that come from being part of this process, you have to play. So then the question is going to come, how do you play? And how do you optimize your chances for success in a new environment, in a world where most Silicon Valley CEOs that I've worked with really don't want to talk to the government. They don't want the government in their business. It's a libertarian philosophy that's prevailed here for a long time. Hands off. I don't want to have to explain this. I don't want to get on red-eye flights to Washington, D.C. Thank you very much. That's not part of their business model. So that's where opportunities we feel we can come in and enable companies to play in this new game.
Good. Well, we just got a whole, some of you can save the best for last. We just got a ton of really good questions in. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time for all of them. One for Eric. What is stopping the labs from spinning out these technologies and applying for funding themselves?
Good question. Actually, nothing. We probably did 16 last year, and that sort of takes us to our capacity. What we've done recently is we've divided all the technologies in the laboratory into 2 closets where we keep them. The closet on the left are breakthrough technologies that will only be of interest to startups, because any major corporation that took them on would put themselves out of business, and that's not a viable business model. So the closet on the right has all of the sort of sustaining technology. We spend a lot of time thinking about how to get stuff out of the closet on the left into commerce. We have accumulated a sort of war chest of money that we have available to invest in maturing that technology, creating actually product prototypes from some of the stuff that was most recently on a piece of paper. And we'll work with anybody interested in licensing that technology to co-fund that, to make it easier, sort of the non-dilutive equity side of laboratory sharing. So yeah, we're working as hard and as fast as we can at putting this stuff in the marketplace, but we need you to stand up and say, okay, so we're going to lead it, because it's against the law for me to do that. Otherwise, I would. Anybody interested in becoming an entrepreneur, give us a call. we'd love to talk to you.
Excellent. That's great. A question for me, what's the role of venture financing in relation to stimulus funding along healthcare, technology, clean energy dimensions? What investment themes hold the most promise? Any particular business models? We have as early stage venture, we're nothing compared to a $700 billion stimulus fund. So, go see the government. But, my answer to entrepreneurs is, while I agree with everything the panel has said in terms of the fact that you'll have applied for the government, the fact that you're paying attention to this, the fact that you're working on working with government is important. We will certainly want to see that. But it doesn't obviously change the fundamental premise. We're going to want to know that your business can stand on its own. And we're going to look at this assuming that you don't get anything, and we're going to look at the business on its own merit. So you should certainly go ahead and push for this money in all the ways we've discussed. But when you're pitching VCs, you got to keep the focus on, hey, even if I don't get this, this is a great business, and here's why. And in terms of areas, the priorities outlined in the bill do provide a good roadmap in certain areas. I mean, certainly in energy, which is one of the areas that we focus on, we call it the extended green economy. These are areas where we've been interested in before, but the fact that there's administration, there's stimulus money, but also more important, just the general priority around these areas makes us even more interested. And that's everything from kind of core areas like solar and energy efficiency, but also different business models that take advantage of the trend towards a movement to a new energy economy. So we have a company that's basically taking over the utility bill, partnering with utilities, and turning the utility bill really into a marketing document for energy efficiency. So it's really basically a software marketing communications company, but it's facilitating the trend to get people to reduce their energy use, and it's working. And they've signed up a lot of utilities and got a huge up round evaluation, and it's really exciting. So green building is another area that we see a big movement towards. And so really all these areas that we've talked about, batteries certainly is a big focus, do provide a good roadmap for folks that are interested in creating new businesses. David, is El Camino Hospital doing, implementing, or planning to take advantage of the stimulus bill in any way? Or are you guys?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, part of the allocation for implementing medical records is substantial for hospitals, and we're at the low end, and we're going to get about $5 million allocated by formula. But hospitals that treat underserved populations like Valley Medical Center in San Jose will get as much as $20 or $25 million. But we're also looking at innovation grants that are available for we're going to wind up with 4 or 5 different grant applications for projects that are available to hospitals.
David, how much leeway is afforded to money set aside for energy efficiency education? For example, can it be applied to enterprise R&D and programs, I guess? So energy efficiency education, what's sort of the run there? I mean, sorry, Donnie.
Okay. I can answer that. In fact, there's a large amount of money set aside for education, and it's not clear to me how it's going to be allocated. So stay tuned is probably the right answer. It's interesting, the DOE, and I had discussions with folks at DOE. They're excited because they had already planned and had allocated money for education, basically on new energy efficiency technologies, on getting audits, really pushing that out. Their budget went up about 50-fold. Think about that, 50-fold in terms of what they needed to do. And so now they're saying, oh gosh, what do? We thought we had a pretty good, succinct plan. So it's kind of, it's amazing what's going to be there. And the people who can deliver that best and help make that happen, I think there's a lot of outsourcing services available. If you can start to get in and help the government do some of this and work with it, I think there's real opportunities there. Did I answer the question? Okay.
Yeah, I believe so. Time for just one more, and then we're going to go through and ask you again all to mention any potential resources for folks, and then we will wrap up. If a small business gets stimulus funding, would there be strings attached, e.g. disclosures similar to SEC reportings of public companies, or other strings or other disclosures of IP? Anyone want to take that on?
It's certainly possible if you take transparency and accountability to its ultimate length. There might be far more disclosure than we've been comfortable with in the past. I think this is clearly something that needs to be worked out and negotiated. Almost everything that you've seen promulgated is in draft form, subject to comment, and so there's already a lot of pushback on all of the new rules and regulations. So this is going to be subject to change, and we'll see how much is there. I think the more transparent that you can be, I think you put yourself in a better position for funding, frankly. So there are some trade-offs that have to be considered.
And just let me comment. For public good, I think there's a real advantage to do that. The two solicitations that I'm working on right now are demo projects, and they are, once we're done, it's a fairly short fuse to get it done, but it's a 2-year commitment to continue to demonstrate it and make ourselves available to help propagate that technology. So I'm good with that. Each one of those is a paid event, by the way, so that's kind of cool.
Well, just about the IP, it seems to me that the model that is more likely to be followed is the same thing that you do with an SBIR. And since it's government funded, just as very many of the research projects here at Stanford are government funded, you would have the same march-in rights, the force majeure holdbacks by the federal government. But I would be surprised to see them require that you somehow share or disclose your intellectual property without protecting it first.
Let me ask you to each quickly go through and list any other resources that people should check out, or you can feel free to reiterate ones you've already mentioned. Just starting with David and go down the line.
All right. Well, I'll mention a local resource. We are a community hospital, but we have within El Camino a Fogarty Institute for Innovation. It was founded by a physician named Dr. Tom Fogarty, who is recognized as one of the great inventors of catheters and other medical devices. He's kind of a Renaissance man. He's also got his own wonderful winery up on top of the hill. You've probably been there. But this institute is designed to bring together scientists and physicians to help them exploit new medical technologies. So it provides support, consulting in terms of the exploitation of technologies. So I'd invite you to take a look. If you Google El Camino Hospital or the Fogarty Institute for Innovation, F-O-G-A-R-T-Y, it's an opportunity.
Well, I would recommend a good read in Idealized Design by Ackoff. We're applying some of those methodologies for transformational change. This is really about thinking about problems and solving them in new ways, and the stimulus is really going to enable the technology that's been developed here to actually be applied, and so that would be a strong recommendation. Idealized Design. Russell Ackoff.
So read a book called Cradle to Cradle. I don't remember the author's name. There are two of them. McDonough, thank you.
William McDonough, yes.
It's a good start if you want to do some basic understanding. I want to go back and say recovery.gov and start there. Do the process. It's a long, lengthy process, but you will get a lot of information, and read the bills that come out. Read the stimulus bill. It's important information if you're an entrepreneur to do that basic research.
So I don't actually have any resources, but yeah, let me suggest to you oh yeah, the flywheel.
There was a question on that.
Was there? The resource that I would suggest is that we have a relationship with all of the Bay Area universities, including Stanford, and we get some of the best ideas for what to do with stuff that was never invented for the marketplace from working with business students and other graduate students. So right now we have a list of, I think, some 17 technologies up on our website that are available to student teams who are participating in business plans. We currently have a team from Stanford who has not only done well with their business plan, they've come to us and said, we want it. We want the technology. We want to do the business. We had one from MIT who did the same thing last year. But one of the easy ways to start down the entrepreneurial road, for those of you that are in fact still students, is just exactly that. And we would love to have you participate with us in helping us understand what it is we have in those left and right-hand closets.
Well, I will also mention one thing I've learned, in addition to the resources mentioned, is that having not read every page of the stimulus bill myself, and having no intention to do so, while I have, while I think I have a lot of good advice for our companies, I can also see the definite wisdom in working with someone like Donnie, or it sounds like Chris, you're working with companies as well, and finding people like that who can help you, because there is a short time frame. It's very complicated stuff. There's another guy named Donnie Fowler, who's dfowler@gmail, that we work with a little bit. But finding someone like one of these guys to help you, I think I definitely see the wisdom all the more after this panel. So please join me in thanking the panel, giving them a round of applause. I'm now going to bring up Hiroshi, who will wrap up. You can now look under your seats and see if you have the yellow dots. Coincidentally, there's a few yellow dots under my seat, so I don't know how that happened. But anyway, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
And let's also thank Josh for a tremendous job moderating. Thank you, Josh. I have a couple of question cards that I want to address, as well as a few questions for the audience. First off is where to get presentations or a copy of tonight's presentations. With your permission, we'll have it on our website in the next 24 hours for download, if that's okay with both of you. So please go to vlab.org to get a copy of the presentation.